The dust clung to Hollis Vane like a shroud, red and unforgiving, coating the inside of his throat and blurring the already sharp edges of the failing world around him. His ranch, 80 acres of stubborn, sun-baked earth, was a monument to bad timing and worse luck. The drought had seen to the crops, the bank had seen to the livestock, and the isolation had seen to his soul. The only thing left of any value was the bay mare, a tough, muscled animal he'd named Ghost for her quiet persistence and the way she seemed to drift through the skeletal landscape. She was his last lifeline, his single piece of tradable currency, the one thing that could carry him away from the grave he was slowly digging for himself. He was sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of oak into a shape he couldn't name, when they appeared at the edge of his property. Two shadows against the dying light, two figures who moved with a grace that was alien to the stumbling gait of the few settlers left in the valley. Apache. The sight wasn't unheard of, but their presence here, so close to the ruined heart of his land, was a stark warning. One leaned heavily on the other, her gait broken, a dark, spreading stain blooming high on her thigh. They didn't approach the house. They just stood, silent and still, the older sister's gaze fixed on him with an impassivity that asked nothing and yet demanded everything. She looked like she expected him to raise a rifle, to shout, to disappear. She looked like she expected the world to do what the world always did, turn its back. It was that expectation of rejection that twisted the knife in Hollis's gut. For 3 months he'd been nursing his own bitterness, a slow, festering wound left by loss and failure. He'd protected that horse with a fierce, possessive paranoia, because keeping it meant holding on to the idea of escape. But looking at the two young women, one bleeding out, the other holding them both together by sheer will, Hollis saw the end of their story written clearly, and it mirrored his own. They were at the limit of their endurance, and the difference between their survival and their demise was one small, desperate act. His act. He lowered the knife and let it clatter onto the porch boards. He pushed himself up, his limbs stiff, and walked towards the barn. He didn't speak a word. He didn't need to. In this landscape, silence was the language of desperation and fate. The mare, Ghost, lifted her head from the trough as he approached, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern light. Hollis ran a hand along her mane, the roughness of the hair familiar and comforting. "Sorry, girl," he muttered, the first words he'd spoken aloud in 3 days. "Looks like you've got a bigger job now." He led her out, the rope soft in his hand, across the cracked earth, and stopped 10 feet from the waiting women. He extended the rope, offering not just the horse, but his future, his means, his very last chance. The older sister, Ka, recoiled fractionally, her eyes widening, not in gratitude, but in profound confusion. The younger, Nidita, swayed, staring at the mare with a disbelief that cut Hollis deeper than any scorn. This wasn't a transaction. It was a surrender. Hollis simply nodded toward the west, where the mountains offered a jagged, impossible hope. "Go," he said, his voice husky from disuse. "Don't stop till dawn." He turned and walked back to his porch, sinking onto the bench, listening to the soft, rhythmic drumming of Ghost's hooves fading into the deepening twilight. The silence that followed was immense, heavy not with regret, but with an unnerving sense of finality. He had nothing left to lose, and in that vacuum, a profound, terrifying peace settled. Whatever came next, he had chosen it. The dawn arrived, not with the gentle, forgiving light he had grown accustomed to, but with the relentless thunder of hooves, a sound that shook the dust from the air and vibrated in the deepest parts of Hollis's chest. He knew immediately this was not the posse or the debt collectors he had been dreading. This was a wave, disciplined and powerful. He counted the shadows cresting the ridge, dozens, then hundreds. 200 warriors. They moved with a singular purpose, flowing down the slopes and spreading out, encircling his ranch like a closing fist. Hollis didn't reach for the rifle. He stood in the doorway, hands loose at his sides, watching the inevitable approach. He realized, with a clarity that stung, that he hadn't just given away a horse, he had intervened in a destiny far larger than his own small, broken life. The formation stopped just beyond his rusted fence line. The silence returned, but this time it was loaded, pregnant with potential violence. A single figure rode out from the center, a man of imposing authority, his face weathered into an unreadable mask of determination. He dismounted, planting his feet firmly on the cursed soil. This was Naali, the father, the chief. And he walked toward Hollis not with the rage of a man seeking vengeance for a perceived theft, but with the coiled tension of a judge presiding over a complex, unexpected trial. Ka, the older sister, emerged from the ranks, moving with a recovered strength, and took up a position slightly behind her father. Her eyes, meeting Hollis's across the short distance, were still calculating, but now tinged with a flicker of something he recognized as protective wariness. Naali stopped 10 feet away. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, his stillness more unnerving than a shout. "You gave them the horse," he stated, his English clear, accented, and precise. "Yes," Hollis croaked. "Your last chance. Your only means of travel or trade." "Why?" Hollis swallowed, tasting the dust. He could lie, invent a motive, but Naali would see through it. "They needed it more than I did. And they looked like they had been running too." Nahali's jaw remained tight, but his eyes searched Hollis's face, probing for the lie that wasn't there. "My daughter, Nidita, was wounded by 3 men. They were not random hunters. They were hired. They were tracking them from the trading post canyon." He paused, letting the implication land. "Those men came here this morning. They were looking for the 2 girls, and for the white rancher who helped them. They are now, as you say, indisposed." Hollis felt a cold spike of fear, instantly replaced by a bleak acceptance. "You killed them." "I protected my kin," Naali corrected. "But they were hired by others, men with influence and greed who seek to take ancestral land. By aiding my daughters, you have exposed yourself to a powerful enemy. You made yourself a witness to my family's escape, and a target in a much larger conflict." The chief stepped closer, drawing the distance between them down to an arm's length. "The question is no longer why you chose to give, but whether you are prepared to choose to fight." He didn't offer a rifle, or a chance to run. Naali simply extended his hand, not for a handshake, but offering a heavy, intricately braided leather band. "You are known to them now. If you stay here, they will find you and make an example of you. If you come with us, you will live long enough to answer for your choice. You chose to save my daughters, now I choose to save the man who saved them. That is the way of the family you chose to become part of, whether you wanted it or not." Hollis looked at the leather band, then at the 200 silent, watchful eyes surrounding them. He looked back at his broken ranch, at the empty barn, at the symbol of his old, failed life. His choice had already been made under the setting sun yesterday. The dawn had only brought the consequences into focus. He took the leather band, tying it around his wrist. "I don't run from people who want to steal and murder." The camp, nestled deep within a canyon, was not the war machine Hollis had expected, but a community, vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the barren silence of his ranch. Children played, women worked, and elders spoke in low, rhythmic tones. He was given a small shelter, and shortly after, Nidita, pale and resting, was brought to him by Ka. "We need you to know why," Ka said, her voice now softened by a shared purpose. Nidita produced a folded, oil-stained document, pulled from the folds of her dress. "When we were spotted at the canyon, I saw it fall from the rich man's saddlebag and took it. The paper was a contract, a clear, horrifying blueprint for land seizure, a detailed plan for provoking and staging attacks on native settlements, creating a pretext for federal troops to sweep in and declare the treaties broken, clearing the way for mining and railroad interests. Signatures and government seals gave it chilling authenticity." Hollis's blood ran cold. This wasn't local cattle rustling or a minor skirmish, this was organized treason on a federal level, disguised as policy. "They cannot afford for this to exist," Naali said, watching Hollis's reaction. They will kill every person who knows of it, which now includes you. He wasn't fighting for land or gold, he was fighting for the truth contained in the stained piece of paper, and for the family who had claimed him as their own. He moved with Naali, protecting the chief's flank, recognizing that if Naali fell, the evidence might never make it out. In the height of the fighting, as the attackers pressed hard towards the shelter holding Nidita, Hollis saw the bearded lieutenant break cover, rifle raised, aimed not at the warriors, but at Naali. Hollis didn't hesitate. He swung his own rifle up, firing in one fluid motion. The shot was true, sending the lieutenant sprawling into the dust. The loss of their leader broke the attackers' morale, and they scattered, melting back into the shadows. The arrival of Marshal Garrett, summoned by an Apache rider sent out hours earlier with a vague but urgent warning, solidified their victory. The marshal's men arrived just as the remaining attackers were regrouping, trapping them in the canyon. The bearded man was captured, his face a mask of defeat. Hollis, exhausted and bruised, handed the contract to Garrett. The marshal's face, as he read the document, mirrored the shock and outrage Hollis had felt. "These are high crimes," Garrett muttered. "Treason. They will answer for this." 3 weeks later, the new camp was established on federally protected territory, the first step in a slow, arduous process of justice. Hollis, the broken rancher, found himself with a purpose he'd never imagined. He helped the children with English, mended tools, and worked beside Ka, the quiet warrior who had once looked at him with such cold suspicion. One evening, Naali came to him, standing by the fire. "You are welcome here, Hollis Vane," the chief said, his voice deep and warm. "You gave your last horse to 2 strangers, and in doing so, you saved my family. Now you are kin. You have a purpose here, a life that is not based on what you lost, but on what you chose to save." Hollis looked at the firelight dancing on the faces of the people around him, a family he had won, not by conquest or wealth, but by an act of pure, desperate humanity. He touched the leather band on his wrist, a quiet, strong connection to a people he had once known only by rumor and fear. He had lost everything to the drought and the bank, but in giving away his last possession, he had been repaid 1,000-fold with something truly priceless, a home, a name, and a fighting chance at a shared, honest future. The silence now was comfortable, the sound of life and belonging, no longer the hollow echo of a failed ranch and a solitary grave.